Hey, you. Welcome to the What Reading Book Podcast, the no boring zone where we get you all excited about books that are worth reading.
On the What Reading Podcast, you get some unbiased take on books, juicy scoops of what runs through the minds of your favorite author. You can call us your virtual book connoisseurs that help you filter through the many books out there and let you know the ones worth reading.
On this podcast, we talk about different book genre. We do not discriminate, from fiction to non-fiction, poetry, biographies, memoirs, you name it, so long as it is written by an author of African descent and project our very own authentic African stories. You can count us in. So welcome on board and thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Always do this. Like, throw me under the bus and make me be the one to do the introduction. Anyways, it's always an absolute delight to be here with the biggest audience ever, or the kindest audience ever, on yet another episode of the What Reading Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again today. My name, of course, is Toby Enyade, and without a doubt, I definitely have my partner in crime or in everything books here with me in person of Oluseyi, maybe hi Sheyi. Say hello to our
Hi,
audience.
Toby. Hi, Toby. Good to have you back again, and good to be on another episode of this podcast as we continue to push through the books that we consider worth reading, as well as push through another episode onto another episode, and just making
Yes,
progress with it.
more and more episodes to come. I almost lost um the flow or forgot how to do this because we've probably taken quite a lengthy break since our last episode. FYI, the last episode which we had up was with a review of Safiata's Everything Good to Come. And that actually was recorded about 3-4 months ago. I think it was in April when I was back in Nigeria. So yeah, it's good to be back doing this virtually again. And we've got an amazing guest with us today and a book that kind of like different and exciting all at the same time, right? And as always, I'm always the one who introduces the best shade. So it's a pleasure to be the one to let you all in on who our guest is today, and of course the book we're going to be discussing. So you've probably seen the title in one of two places. I know that back in Nigeria, bookstore Ruby Night definitely carries copies. It's published by Farafina, and Kachifo is known for very beautiful African storytelling, right? And then in the UK and other part of the world, it's definitely available on Amazon. I think they were the one that signed, Umar Turaki. Yes, I let the cat out of the bag already. Our guest today is Umar Turaki, the author of Such a Beautiful Thing to Behold. Hi, Umar. Lovely to have you here.
Hi, Toby. Hi, Shay. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you
It's a
so
great
much for your
pleasure here as
time.
well to
Yeah.
have you. Thank you for joining in, and we look forward to a very interesting session with you. Looking at your book, Such a Beautiful Thing to Behold. What Toby usually talks about the cover of the book, but I'll talk about it this time around. So I think that
We're
just
switching
looking at
roles.
that,
Okay.
yeah, just looking at that, the tree that you have on the cover, I'm just wondering, um, it kind of mirrors the soul of the book
Hmm.
because just starting out and seeing everything that unfolded, in the book. I was going to ask, is this the fire tree you keep talking about?
The flame tree.
Yeah, the flame tree.
The fire tree is also nice. I like the sound of that. But yes, it is. It's the book on the cover is the book and the story. And I think, and interestingly, it's on both. It's on the covers of both editions of the book.
Oh, okay.
both the international edition and also the this is the international edition, and there's a
Yeah.
kind of it's rendered in an interesting way as well, but it seemed very separate teams worked on it, but it seemed, I don't know, everybody sort of seemed to be tapped into that idea that
Right
it was
idea.
important, to have it on the cover.
It's interesting how creative minds work. Actually, one would have imagined that perhaps you were the one that provided the direction for what that cover should look like, and you perhaps told the international creative team to, yeah, I want a tree, because the tree on the Nigerian edition, which is the one I also have here with me in the UK, I think I love the Nigerian cover more.
Hmm.
Is more prominent than the one from the international edition, so it's
Hmm.
definitely worthy of note. And I think our audience would definitely love to meet you before we dive very quickly into the book, right? Before now, the norm used to be that we would, probably be the ones to reel out the profile or the bio of the author, but we want our authors to, be the ones who blow their trumpets, right? And we don't want them to be modest about it at all. So please let our audience know more about you and who Umar Turaki is in all of its essence.
Well, I don't have much of a trumpet to blow. As much as I don't like blowing it, if it exists. But I am a storyteller, and it's something basically I've been wanting to do my whole life. I've pursued it with every fiber of my being, and when I was 14, I just decided I wanted to write, and it was a dream that just kept blossoming. And by the time I was 16 or 17, I had self-published a novel that kind of just got that, that was like the first culmination, the first milestone, I guess, to suggest that something was possible with this. And then I spent over the next few years, I became a filmmaker,
Mm.
and I worked in the Nigerian film industry as a screenwriter, and also wrote and directed and produced a few short films, directed for television, just quite a range of things. And it's. I think both sides of I've carried both sides of my creativity, in terms of the film and in terms of the writing. And I've, as difficult as it has been, it's something I've wanted to always carry, both at the same time. I didn't want to have to sort of leave one at the expense of the other. And yeah, I don't know. I care about stories that are meaningful, stories that are, profound, complicated, that don't necessarily give easy answers. And hopefully, leave audiences with something to think about.
And you sure did that on this one because, oh my days, I'm sure this is not the first time you're getting that feedback. And if you type in this book on Google search or go on Amazon, the very interesting ratings and reviews will kind of like throw you off guard a bit, and you're like, okay, what am I reading? So you definitely succeeded in, guessing or eliciting that particular varied reaction from your audience.
Mhm.
And my very next question is going to tie into one of the statements you made earlier on about how you did not want to choose between filmmaking as well as your passion for telling stories or being an author or a writer, right? And I noticed that lately there's been this trend where we see filmmakers, actors actually becoming novelists or becoming writers. And an example of one of those people that I observed in recent times that has done that is Kehinde Fadipe, who is the author of In Such Tremendous Heat. And the book actually got published last month, and I thought it's quite fascinating to see someone who has always been on the big screen, write a book. And I'm just curious to find out if there's anything in one form of this of the heart of filmmaking and
Mm.
writing that kind of like lends credence to the other, and how you manage to merge both, or where the heart of a filmmaker is at one time and then that of a writer
Mm.
another time. Do you think it kind of like support they play complementary or supportive role in any shape or form?
I think they do. I think that there's a lot of overlap, even though they're very, very different.
Mm,
And for someone like me, a question, a big sort of, I guess, preoccupation that comes up, that's rooted in the question that you ask is just even deciding, if you have an idea for a story, just even from the beginning, like, how do I do this? Should this be written? Should it be literature, or should it be cinema?
mm,
And just figuring that out. That in itself is an interesting process for me. And oftentimes I don't necessarily, have um, a logical process of deciding. A lot of times it's sort of a gut instinct.
mm,
In which I just feel like this is like I would like to be just sink my teeth into this as a novelist, or as a short story writer, whatever. Um, that said, I find that over the years I constantly kind of look back at my output in both forms, and find myself always comparing the two. And I think one of the conclusions I drew quite recently was that um, filmmaking has its own demands, and in many ways, it's writing. You sit in a room and you write. Basically, you write your book, and it's a very solitary thing, and you only begin to answer to people, or begin to sort of engage in in any kind of you know I don't know, friction, but not in a bad way, but just the friction of conversation and refinement and trying to get it better because you're pushing it through a process. You only do that after you've sort of produced the thing, right? But with film, it's very different. Yes, you write the script, but before you shoot a single frame, you have to like line up, I don't know, 5, 10 people, because you need an actor, you need a cameraman. You can't do it all by yourself. And I realized that because I was trying to be a filmmaker in a setting that was very, very difficult. I was living in Jos at the time, and I refused to move to Lagos because I just
refuse. That's an interesting word to use. I mean,
No,
Lagos is known to be like this capital of entertainment in Nigeria, and if you want to blow, it has to happen in Lagos. And so
Yes.
your defiance kind of like fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean,
about that.
it was. I think it was very. It was very naive, very brave, and but it was a choice I made, and I felt because the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell, like I knew the kinds of stories I wanted to tell, and I was really interested in planting myself in the place where I felt I would be open to sort of receiving I guess like the pollen of inspiration, and Joss and environ sort of seemed like that place. And and I'm very particular about those kinds of stories. I'm interested in, I guess the lesser known, or even the lesser told Nigerian stories. I'm interested in those stories that you don't always think about when you look at Nigeria as a whole, stories that fall between the cracks. But one thing I came up, of course, and I'm sorry, it's sort of turning out to be a long-winded, but I promise you, I'm going somewhere with this.
It's okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
The the challenge with Joss was that I was working with very, very limited resources, and with access to limited talent in a way, because all the talent was moving to Lagos, and so as a way of coping with that, I sort of tamed my imagination, and I was sort of trying to write within the constraints. So one of the things I tried to teach myself as a film writer, as a script writer and as a producer, was how do I create with a budget in mind? How do I write to a particular budget so that it can be easy to make it? And so when I was looking back, I realized and I realized that my fiction, my literary side, really leaned into, I think, I don't know, for want of a better word, I think it was a bit more imaginative. There was a certain freedom I had with the imagination, and frivolousness, and that it leaned into, the magical, the speculative and all of that, that my film side did not. And it was only sort of after a few years of doing that I realized that, the constraints of filmmaking had, in a way, rooted my imagination. So now I'm in a place where I'm beginning to push back against that assumption. And I'm beginning to try and see how ideas and even the imagination can combine. I don't, why police yourself? Why police your imagination? The world is going to do enough of that for you. Don't do that to yourself, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that has been kind of my own process. And I often get this comment that people have told me a lot of times that even my fiction feels very cinematic. And for a long time, I didn't really know what that meant, because I was just writing what felt natural, But I think there is a very strong visual component to the way I think about. I think about things, I think about scenes, the imagery and all of that, and how I put it on the page. And I think that carries over very naturally for me into script writing as well, and into how I render it as a director.
Amazing.
Wow, that's quite
I must say
interesting.
that the imagery in this book, the imagery is quite vivid, if I'm being honest. And I think one of the beautiful things about such a beautiful thing to build is that the book just draws you in, and the reader is left to be the one to think that comes by in his or her mind. And I think that's actually one of those things that characterize a very powerful storyteller. Like you actually showing and not telling. And so you leave us to be the ones who, create so many of those things in our minds. And it really took me back to should I use the word ancient city of Jaws? And I was going to, I'm going to say that I don't know if there's something about the water or the air that they breathe in Jaws. Sorry, I'm being super Nigerian on you right now. But there is just this patriotism about people from Jaws, and they are actually exceptionally creative. And we could go on and on around, different industries and, different elements of the art and culture scene, and such predominant roles that many of them tend to play. I'm a huge fan of Emaya Baga, and we all know that, of course, he's from Jaws. We could talk about his brothers, and I don't know if there's something about that landscape or the people or the environment that kind of like stimulates its people to be super creative. And yeah, even for MI as a musician, I think he's such a great wordsmith, and he does so much with his words. And I'm not shocked that a lot of people have come forward to say that your book is actually super cinematic as well. So big credence to Joss for producing some of the brightest creatives that have ever stepped out of Nigeria. She, do you agree?
Yeah, I think. Oh, of course, I can't but agree. I think that when I started to realize that this book was, just related or just set, just by going through the pages and encountering the names used, I was
Mm.
like, nah, these names have to be just names. Because in the course of work, I've met a couple of my colleagues that bear similar names. I have a colleague that his name was Plank G,
Mm.
and so forgive me, I grew up in Lagos, so I never really I'd met some of people that bore those names until I moved to Abuja, and I started to hear some. I was like, oh, okay. So once I started reading the book and I started seeing the names, I was like, oh no, these are just names. Nobody can tell me anything. And it's interesting that one thing I would say I enjoyed about the book or going through the pages was there were a lot of abstract things to my mind, but it was good to start to create those pictures. Seeing how you wove between different characters, telling their stories, through their own eyes and experiences. So it was as though I had to start creating like a mental map for each person, for each location you indicated, each house that you indicated, and stuff like that. So yeah, that was quite different, but very very well executed. Yeah. So yeah, just I've never been to Jos, my bad, but I look forward to visiting that city one of these days.
My answer is there's a secret, but it's in Jos, and only we Jos people know
Can
it. So
you
you have
imagine?
to you
Why
have
do
to
people
come to
like
Jos.
this?
You have to come to Jos and be initiated. So I will share with you.
Um, for context and for the sake of inclusiveness, I guess it makes sense because we have audience that cut across different part of the world. And I found out that in my short time in the UK already, whenever I have cause to interact with non-Africans, for example, white people, um, it's kind of a lot to paint a picture or help them understand how nuanced and vast Nigeria is to start with. In fact, there are people that would meet me, for example, and because I'm not ready to tell such a lengthy story, just say, "Oh, I'm from Africa," and then I later had to, rejig my mind and say, "Okay, you know what? Africa is a continent, right? I
Just
am
like
from
Europe.
Nigeria, right? And Nigeria is also in itself is actually vast and it's interesting for many of them. They find it quite intriguing when you begin to say that, oh, even though I'm from Nigeria, there's still some part of that country that's alien to me. Because just like Shay, I
Mhm.
grew up in Lagos. I think the farthest I've ever been in the north is Abuja, right? And so I think it's really very important to, have all of those, nuances, and so that we are international diaspora audience kind of like can identify and relate to what we're saying. So yeah, Jos is in the northern part of Nigeria. It's a very, very beautiful city in Plateau. And yes, like I said earlier, there are some of the most creative brains to ever stem out of, the country. Um, let's talk about Gray. Yes. That sounds very interesting, right? The way I just went, yes, let's talk
that sounds
about
like a
Gray.
that sounds like a person now.
Okay, it's like the elephant in the room, right? And
Oh,
it's
sounds like
kind
a
of like,
demon somewhere.
yeah, it's kind of very central to this book and the story in itself. And I'm just like, don't let me say what I want to say, right? But I'm just like, this person must be insane in a very good way. And I mean that with such a huge respect for how much you were just able to create that, what's the name? Should I use the character or dystopian world and, got your audience right from like the first or second page to buy into the concept of gray. And we're like, okay, yeah, and then in my mind, I was trying to figure out like, okay, is gray COVID-19? No, it's not. It makes me like it's quite, I'm just curious to know what actually inspired that particular disease for you and what your writing process or your thought process is like. I know you already mentioned that you have quite an imaginative mind, but it would be great if you can let us into that space a bit.
um, So the gray, it's not. I mean, first of all, just the process of working on the story itself was quite a while. It started. So the story itself started out as a short story. And I think I was probably 22 or 23. This was like 2010 or so.
Interesting.
When I decided, and the story itself was actually my first attempt at writing a short story. Before that, I'd been writing for almost 10 years, but I'd never written a short story. I'd only been working on novels that just were not successful. So after like my second or third attempt at writing, a novel, I just decided, okay, you know what, just go back to nursery school. It was kind of a way of just telling myself, just take a step back. Just go and find a small playground and just play around a little. And the Gray was the first. It was actually titled The Gray, and it was the first short story that I tried to write. And I think I was writing that out of. I think the year before that, I had read The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And that book was it was the first piece of writing by Cormac McCarthy. I mean, he's since become one of my favorite writers, but that was the first piece of writing I'd written. And it was the first time I was encountering prose that, I don't know, there was just an exquisite power to it that, there was a story level and there was a prose level. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whatever this guy is doing, I want to do that. But the book itself, it had such a lasting impression on my mind because it's a very, very dark book and it's a very heavy book. And I think I was drawn by how the writer was able to communicate such a dark and painful world and still be able to weave in like these threads of hope and beauty. And that really stayed with me. So I think I started writing The Gray just out of that. I don't know. I think partially out of that, just sense, of that I carried with me from reading the book. And then the other thing and mind you, like a lot of this, I just sort of realized in retrospect, when I was just even thinking about like, well, why did I even decide to have something like The Gray and this sickness? And I don't know if you're familiar with his Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. So there are 3 books in that. There's The Golden Compass, or not in the UK, it was published as Northern Lights. In the US, it was published as The Golden Compass. Then the second book, The Subtle Knife, and the third book, The Amber Spyglass. And it's a fantasy collection of stories that, I mean, I started reading as a teenager, and it broke so many rules. There was a way it just tore apart things that I never even imagined that you could do, in fantasy, let alone in children's literature. And in the second book, there's this strange thing that happens because a huge part of the book itself it sort of engages this idea of innocence versus experience, childlikeness, and being a child versus being an adult. And it sort of uses speculative metaphysical elements to kind of explore that, in an interesting way. And there's this weird particle that's called dust, and there's a way it sort of, children attract it, for whatever reasons. And there are certain people that sort of have an interest in the particle of dust. And in the second book, there's this thing that happens where there are these strange specters. They're called specters in the book, and they kind of, so their children are immune to them, and they're kind of, so. But the moment a child begins to, become an adolescent, they're invisible. But there are certain people that with certain devices they see them, and then they begin to notice how these things, it's like they're, how vultures, when like, somebody's about to die or something is about to die, and vultures sort of start hovering
Yeah.
around.
Gather around. Yeah.
And so you'd see these specters in the book, just waiting, basically. It's almost like they're waiting for this child, this person to, just come of age, just reach a point, and then they just come in. And they just suck the life, they suck, and I think that stayed with me as well. And obviously, for those that have read the book, the Grey also kind of works in a similar way in that children are immune. And, so I think I would say that those two things really inspire I think they really influenced how I imagined the Grey and how I rendered it in the book.
Okay, interesting. I think one thing I just sort of thought about while reading the book is how you came about some of these characters. Not necessarily their names, but more especially the stories that they had to tell. So looking at what I'm trying to figure out what influenced the stories around a character like Zumji, for instance. I won't believe I got that term. So three characters that stood out for me: Zumji, Arit, especially how she was on the other side of town, and then but she was in very very constrained circumstances, and just helping someone escape was our own introduction into back to Pilam. What really was your process coming up with those with those names, with those stories, and how do you think that you can now build up more on some of the lives that some of these people live in the book? Because sometimes I always like to think about the life after for some of the characters. Are there going to be sequels and things like that?
I know they say never, but to be honest, the book itself, there was a draft of it that went much farther than the end.
Oh, okay.
And the end kind of happened almost by, I think and I don't really outline, I'm a very, I kind of have a sense of it. And then I have I plot out these little sort of milestones that I aim for. So and between milestones, I'm never really sure what's going to happen. I am completely surprised and I'm taking in a completely different direction. And I try to leave room for that process of discovery. And I think I got to the scene where the book ends and I realized, but what else do you need to talk about? Because the book has said what it wants to say, with this scene and everything. And I realized that was a combination of everything. And it just felt like that was where it should end. So I don't intend to do any sequels. In terms of the characters, it's and their names and all of that. My mom is Ngas, and Ngas is what is the language that informs the names, basically all the proper names in the story.
Okay.
And Ngas it's one of the languages of Plateau State. It's actually not in Jos. It's like in central. It's central. It's sort of south to Jos. It's central Plateau State. And that part of the state, it influenced, how, the landscape and even the names of the food and, how a lot of things were rendered and even like the buildings and things like that.
Yeah, the names of the food.
Yeah, it's all drawn from that. And so, I just, took names from that language essentially. The first character that, when I started the short story, Dunka was the first character. And he was basically the only character throughout that story. His siblings, yeah, he's Dunka. And he was the first character. And as the book kept growing, I became more interested in, well, what's going on with this character, because the idea basically was that here was this this young person. And interestingly, the reason Dunka is the age he is because I was that age. That was the age I was at when I started writing the story. And then I just sort of grew older.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
So here was this young person who, in a sense, they were orphaned, and he just felt responsible and obligated to, be there for his younger ones, even though he had been doing a bad job of it. But then, the more I kind of thought about it, the more I became interested. And so it very slowly grew into an ensemble piece, where I began to look at what was happening with other characters. Zumji actually came much later. I think he was a figure. He was a character that was just sort of floating at the edge of the story that, I had an awareness of him, but I'd never really paid much attention to him until I got to a point where, well, I have 4 siblings, and I have this other girl who is across the way in this other town, and it felt like bringing him in was a good way of rounding it out and having different perspectives.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you for that. Run through. I would one character I missed talking about, even though it was just for a very short while that he existed. It just showed how, when we say how deep the heart of man can be, is Goshi.
Mm.
How it was Nana's boy at some point, and then how one's benefactor can then be the same person that would put a knife through, or put a hit a wood on the head of the other, and then assume so much control and then get out of control, eventually leading to his final destruction. I really didn't see how I really didn't see that end for him coming, because I felt that he had gotten so strong that it was impossible for anyone to be able to topple him, or stand in resistance to some of his actions. But again, I would ask. I know many times when you write, just like you said, it's not like there was a sequence to how you wanted to tell that story. But I just want to ask, why you wrote Goshe into the story.
I mean,
No
along the way.
Jay. No spoilers.
Thank you. Thank you for having trying to have a spoiler-free conversation. Yeah, I appreciate it. But it's so. I mean, the more the story grew, the more I began to, I guess, recognize the fact that there was a vacuum, and I became interested in just the basic idea of what happens when children are left to themselves and to their own devices, and I guess it was just a way of also exploring another way of exploring another side of human nature, and what we are truly capable of, if we are given the right mix of circumstances and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think Goshi just seemed like a culmination of that. And of course, also I guess partially influenced by Lord of the Flies. But he became a way to, I don't know, I think he just became, I think he became a way of just, because I do believe that as much as it's dangerous to leave children, it's such a complicated, thorny thing, because as much as it's dangerous to leave children to their own devices, and that children need guidance, I think children inherently are just capable of so much good, and that there's something about coming up against, I don't know if evil is the word, but just coming up against something that is different from what seems right or what feels, and that I think even a child would have a sense, that there's something, and I think that's part of our human nature, that there's something about us that abhors violence and abhors, wrongdoing in a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with Goshi, I wanted to kind of just show that this was someone that was taking advantage of the situation and
Yeah.
was kind of brainwashing these kids, even though he himself seemed to be a kid,
Mm-hmm.
with Goshi, it's an interesting thing because I really do think that he is a deranged character,
Yeah.
and I say it, also just with the awareness that I think we also need to be careful about how we talk about mental health, and
Yeah.
you know, just so that, because I think there's always that risk of demonizing, mental health and just saying, oh, this person did that because she's crazy or whatever. But in his own case, I really do think that there was something about the situation and the circumstances, and I think just the fact that sometimes people just show who they truly are when they have the opportunity, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in his own case, I think, it was just a combination of all of these things, and that he got very, very, very carried away with, and intoxicated with just the abilities and the things to do these kinds of things without consequence. And it's also interesting with him because he was someone that I wanted, that even though he was that age, but I wanted an ambiguity to him, because it's like he seems to have the gray. Does he have it? Does he not have it? Like what's going on with this character? And I wanted to have that question hovering over him without having to like settle on anything. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
makes
it does actually. it answers. It answers. I think before Toby, I'll just jump in and ask one more thing, not about the character this time around. I think that one other part of the stories that jumped at me was the ease with which death was meted out.
Mm.
there were too many
Yes.
of it. Oh my god.
Yeah,
Hi.
and I think
Hi.
that I
Before
know
Sorry,
we started,
sorry.
let's start. No, no,
what
no,
makes it
no, be honest.
what
You
makes it rather different is you wouldn't have realized that you actually described that they killed someone. It almost would feel like you just described
just like
that
that.
someone slapped another and just went away. But we're
I
talking
just
about hitting someone's head with a giant stick,
yeah.
sliding a knife through one's belly and taking another stab and things like that. So
Mm.
um, it's not so much of a
Quite
question, but
graphic, yeah.
just an interesting comment on that. But again, I think that what I've come to learn is with art is a reflection of life, and sometimes we see death as something that, oh, when one stabs another, we almost want to think of it like a movie where there's there's slow motion, there's sound effects,
Mm.
but in real life, really, there's none of that. It just
Mm.
happens so quickly,
Mm.
and that's it.
No, you're absolutely right. I think there's always a danger of glamorizing violence, and I think
Hmm.
one of the things the violence felt very important to me with the book.
Why? Please. I had to ask because there was a point where I just felt like, oh my god, like
Another
the
one.
world currently is actually full of evil already. And when I want to read, I want to escape from my reality. And then here I am stuck with this very dark and heavy book, and it's just almost like, yeah,
Mm.
person don't die. Yeah, move on, moving on swiftly and all of that. So again, at the back of my mind, I'm just like, why was that important for you to,
Mm.
depict
Mm.
violence in its rawest form like you
Mm.
did?
Mm. I don't know. I think I just wanted. I mean, a big part of, even with the gray, a big part of the impulse was just I wanted to, I guess, in a way, explore darkness. And I think the question was, is it possible to kind of encounter darkness and encounter such brutality and still find the capacity to be able to hope and, to find hope again. And so it seemed important for me to kind of put the characters through that, that. And with regarding the violence, I also wanted to show that there are consequences, and as, Pansha kind of gets in the middle of something, and it's almost a heroic sort of thing, but there are profound, he carries that weight, and other characters that also that end up committing these incredible, just terrible acts of violence that they also carry that with them, and it's, and it's going to shape them, and I think I wanted to just, is it possible for characters and for people to go through that and still be able to find meaning and still find hope and still find some kind of light, and a reason to keep on living. So that, coupled with the gray and all of that, I think the darkness and the bleakness of the book as a whole, that was really very much what I was going for.
You sure did that. Okay, so my next question, I know this has been such an exciting conversation and really mind blowing as well, in my opinion. I'm going to ask around your commentary about the speculative fiction genre, especially in African literature. I know there are very few authors or writers out there that actually explore this particular subgenre, in my opinion. A lot of people tie it very closely to sci-fi as well, fantasy fiction, and all of that. And personally, and this is me being honest, I'm actually very unapologetic about it, right? I'm not a fan of that particular subgenre. And personally, this was a book that I read literally out of my comfort zone, but it wasn't such a shabby experience anyways, because I believe you managed to weave in this um, phrase that has been ringing a lot lately, or has been resonating with me lately, around how chaos and joy and hope can coexist at the same time, right? And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. What your thought is as regards speculative fiction, and how it's actually developing. Do you think people are actually embracing that more? Is there like a growing acceptance of that particular genre currently in African literature? Because I know it has such endless possibilities, and I don't even think we've actually scratched the surface here in comparison to what other European writers have actually done with it. So that would be really fascinating to get what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think there's an irony in the sense that we are such spiritual people, and our cultures, and all of that, like there is an assumption of the spirit world. There's a basic assumption that the spirit world exists, and it's woven into
our everyday lives.
Everyday lives, exactly. I remember coming across this screenshot. It was a statement. It was a statement put out by. It was an official statement put out by, I think it was a hospital in Maiduguri. I think it was a university teaching hospital or something, in Borno State, and that's in Maiduguri, and a patient had been brought to the hospital, and and basically they sort of wrote the letter. So whoever was there, wrote the letter and basically said the conclusion was that they were possessed by spirits and that they have been.
How can you put that scientifically?
And that was an unofficial document, and I just saw that it was, I mean, but that's how we live, that's how we live, for better or worse, right? And I don't know, but I find, for me, I don't know, I just found that my imagination has always kind of leaned, towards that, and just an interest in that. And I think there has been a certain kind of expectation, and it kind of, I mean, smarter people have had these debates, but just around the idea of expectations of what African literature can be, and I think for the longest time, just because of the antecedents, you have the things fall apart, and I mean, and those are, not to take away from their importance, and how much they opened the door, for writers that followed across the generations, but I think that set a certain expectation that African fiction could only be one thing, and it either had to be political, it had to have a certain kind of consciousness. It could only, or literary, the quote unquote literariness to it, and I even people like Chimamanda, just pushed back against that, because she wanted to write a romance novel with Americana, but she still wanted it, and so I think it's interesting that we have those complications, I think, in our psyche and in our imaginations because I think we've a lot of readers, I think, are not used to the idea that African writers can sort of just break out and write things that seem strange and write things that are an interesting amalgamation of, just strangeness. And I think it's a process, and it's a really, really exciting time because I think the doors are opening. And it's also this thing where sometimes it takes a writer or somebody, to be appreciated internationally before even people back home kind of
being recognized.
Begin to notice and begin to pay attention. And I think that may very well. I think that may very well be the case for a lot of speculative writers. You have people like, I'm really, really excited to read Wole Talabi's, new book that just came out, Shigidi, and it's it's an interesting, it combines like folklore, it combines like the heist concept, and it leans into like commerciality in such a refreshing way. But that it's also just really, really well written and well imagined as well, and that's like all what the reviews and all the advanced praise has been saying. So people like that, you read about them and you're like, okay, it's complicating that notion of what African literature is about, and I think, people should just write what people should write what they want to write. And I think readers should be as open-minded as possible and just, because you never know.
Experience.
Yeah.
One other thing I was going to say is that I think I found the answer to my question in your response, which is the fact that our audience or the African reader still needs to be a bit more open-minded. And it's not because I realized that very few traditional publishing houses, even in Nigeria, are open to the idea of even signing off a manuscript that is speculative fiction. There's some of them that kind of like can identify them. It's because there's a big question around how commercially viable they are. Are there does that particular would the manuscript or the book actually cut across different audience rather than publishing someone who is focused and is this imaginative. Maybe we should do something that is more widely acceptable. That's the for lack of a better word. And then you're right about the fact that most times for many of our African writers that decide to take the road less traveled, they probably have to get that, credibility or that cred for their work internationally first before guys back at home begin to support it and see the need to actually sign them up or buy the copyright to their book. And one other author that I think is doing so many amazing stuff around fantasy fiction. Aside from the big names like Tomi Adeyemi of Children of Blood and Bone, is Sui Okungbowa, and someone I know personally. I'm totally looking forward into his. I think his book should be out again. Third book most likely in November, and nobody took an interest when you speak to she will tell you about how so many publishers on the continent sort of like rejected his manuscript and just didn't see how viable it can be, and then it's like hot cake in North America, in America, and now from there it just cascades down, and people begins to make such writers the first to record wicked eventually. So yeah, a big thank you and thumbs up to you for daring to believe so much in this story and the viability too, and so glad that Farafina actually saw such huge potential in it to actually sign this off. I know I was reading your acknowledgement page and I saw how you gave Onajite what they mentioned. I know she's a fantastic editor and has the height for spotting such incredible stories anyway. So really excited about this. Yeah.
Can I just to their credit, to their credit, Farafina was the first. Basically, Farafina was the first person, even before I sold the book internationally. Farafina, I sent it to Farafina, and they called me back and they said, "We want this." They were the first person. Basically, outside of myself, they were the first person in the world. Enagite was the first person to say, "There's something here, give us more, and that just kept me going. And it was after that I even was able to get my international book deal. So yeah, I think it's interesting that that was the order of events, and I'm always grateful.
Interesting. Final question for me would be if you see yourself stepping out of this particular genre and maybe exploring other forms of writing aside from speculative fiction or sci-fi, like as we know it. Do you see yourself coming down to your wild imagination might be, but that's
coming down to our level.
But absolutely, there's nothing wrong with this, to be fair. And it just shows you how powerful the human mind is. I used to credit myself as someone who is has a very wild imagination and all of that. And I imagine perhaps that one day I would put that to good use to script writing and all. But this, I have such huge respect for, writers of, fantasy fiction in general. So anything outside of that particular scope coming from you soon?
I mean, I'm interested in all genres, and here I'll say this, that to be honest, I don't even think of myself as, primary. Yes, a lot of the books that have shaped my imagination have been speculative, but I don't even think myself primarily as that, because I am very interested in the world. I think that speculative fiction just has an inherent power to be able to talk about the world in a way that is direct, in a way that is almost literal, in a way that realist fiction cannot. That we're able to make commentary about human experience and living using metaphors and imagery that we render as real in the story. But you're just taking something that exists that just doesn't have a form, and you're giving it a form in the story. And I think that it feels truer to me in many ways. But having said that, I don't even think of myself as because I am interested in the world. But so even with such a beautiful thing to behold, initially it was a very, it was a made up world. I had all these other animals and everything. And I got to a point where I was like, but I feel like it's watering it down too much. And I just sort of took everything away. And the only speculative element I left was the gray. And, and I feel like that's becoming more of my interest, where I look at the world as we know it. And I'm interested in, what if I add like a little speculative element to sort of stir things up? And how does that help us see the world, I think, more clearly? But to answer your question, I'm interested in all kinds of things, and I wouldn't be surprised if I'm working on a couple of things, and let's see how they go. I won't be surprised if one of them ends up being very realist and grounded.
Picture. Okay, we'll look forward to that and keep our fingers crossed. Any final
and there'll be less blood. No.
Such a relief.
But the funny thing though is that there wasn't so much blood actually, because not all of the killings were so graphic. In fact, some of the killings occurred so quickly that we didn't even get to read of how the blood spilled or how the blood moved around the bodies and things like that. So yeah, a lot of killings, but not so much blood. So blood is welcome actually.
Just give me bombastic side eyes, Shay. Honestly. Because you're a
Someone
man,
said
though.
something.
If you see
You
blood
know,
in the next, if you see
you know,
too much blood, you know who to blame now. So
someone said something once. Someone said something once on Twitter about how I think the person is a military personnel, and he made a joke about how movies tend to depict that there's actually a few seconds between when the pin of a grenade is removed and
Hmm.
when the explosion occurs. So, the movies
Mhm.
tend to depict that someone can actually remove the pin and have enough time to kick it back or deflect it, and then it explodes somewhere. And the guy was like, "See, it almost happens instantly." So that was what I meant when with some of the killings I described, we've gotten so used to drama, to special drama around killings, or special drama around special effects, special drama, special narrations around death and killings, that reading how you sort of described it looked too easy on the eye, and you
Yeah,
literally have to go back
you
and
didn't
say,
beat around the bush, yeah. You
yeah,
just
you literally just have to go back and say, oh, did that guy die? Okay, I died though. Wow. So yeah, that was just something I found quite intriguing. But all in all, I would say that this was definitely a good read. I know that for someone like me, that I grew up reading a lot of sci-fi books. This book, for instance, The Grey, it reminds me of a book that was written by Frank Peretti called The Oath, something
Hmm.
similar.
Hmm.
And then I read most of the
yeah, yeah.
Jurassic Park series and all of that, and so I kind of could walk with you as you described some of the incidents that occurred, and I would say that I'm very sure that an open mind, a very curious mind, will definitely find this very very interesting to read, and just follow the lives, or follow the stories through the lives of the different characters that you sort of pictured, cry at some points, laugh at some other points, and at one or two other points, just watch or read solemnly as the lives of those people progressed or were even halted by another character in the book. So yeah, I enjoyed reading this. Thank you very much for putting pen to paper on this, and I'm sure that there are a lot more people like me that would enjoy reading it and enjoy the death
Well, thank you.
in the book.
Thank you for
Hey,
reading.
why are you making me look like the black sheep here? But anyways,
More like the white sheep,
um,
you mean?
okay, I'll take that. I was going to ask you to do one last thing for us before you go, which is if you could just take time to pronounce the names of some of the characters. That's one thing I always love when
Mm,
I have like reading sessions with authors, just to be sure that we are getting all of the accents right, and not because I
mm.
mean I think Sheyi Elion mentioned Pishang and you pronounced it differently when you were talking. So maybe 4 or 5 of them, if you can just pronounce that, that would be lovely.
Thank you for asking me to do that. It's always meaningful. Um, so Shay actually said Zumji's name perfectly.
Okay.
So Zumji, Dunka,
Yeah, I
Panmun,
got Zumbi. Yeah. Right.
Panmun, Panchak.
Okay.
A little bit of just trivia. Ice Prince's name is actually Panchak, even though it wasn't
Yeah, I know.
intentional.
I got that correctly.
So Panchak, so it's a fairly more recognizable name. You've got Rit Dernain, who is otherwise known as Rit for short, um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and Arit.
Nanake.
Right, Nana Kanke, Nana Kanke.
Okay.
Yeah, Kanke. Then there's what was the last? Oh, Aritma. and it's interesting. So just a bit of in my mom's village, the name Arithma, I took it from a lady, and Arithma means the way is good. And this woman, I found out that she was actually born in the East, and that yeah, she was born in the East. I think around like during the war. I can't even remember. Her father was a soldier, but she apparently she has an Igbo name, and I think it's Uzomaka or something, and I think it also means the same thing in Angasa as well.
Okay.
And yeah, but people called her Aritma, and my mom used to call her Uzomaka all the time. But it was so interesting, but she inspired Aritma, the name of Aritma actually. So anyway.
Amazing.
So
Thank you so much for sharing. The final bit is the rating, right? We usually like rate every book we discuss on the show over 10. Is it over 10? I forgot it. Okay,
Yeah,
some
it's
book
over
it
10
does
actually.
5-star, right? Yeah, so over 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate? Such a beautiful thing to be on.
I would say it's a 7. I was going to do 7.5. One comment that I would have passed earlier. I think it starts out as a slow build, right?
Mm.
But once you get into the heart of it, it then becomes a page turner. You really cannot drop the book because, just the initial build of, which I know is typical, building the characters, trying to help us um, see each person's story, and then we then get into the pulsating parts of the journeys to the other side, the near death experiences, the deaths that occurred, and then even the new lives that came after. I would say that it's actually a total package, and I think, yeah, I'll do a 7.5. Change of mind, 7.5. Yeah.
Be decisive, okay? Anyways, for me, I was actually going to do a 7.5 too. And I've been honest enough to tell you some of the things that I didn't really sit down well for me about the book. And that's for obvious reasons. Maybe because I'm an empath, I'm a woman, and oftentimes I feel like the world is full of all sorts of evil that for me to now read a book that is also reflecting that evil again. I just want to escape and create this fantasy, this world that is actually beautiful and, all of
LOL.
that. But, but for me, what I love the most about this book is the fact that it is literary fiction at its finest. Like I can't say that enough. And I think I was mentioning during the last episode that if there's anything at all that I thought I've been missing some of the contemporary Muslim fiction that we're getting out there in recent times is that many of them seem to water down that particular element. I want someone who is going to post my mind and make me like feel, oh my god, damn, you've got lines, your mind is wild, and that particularly did it for me. And I honestly cannot get over the beautiful prose. The narrative was really, really memorable and engaging. And so I love flowery words. I love words that, but in spite of them being flowery, I'm also very keen to make sure that what's the word now? That it's done with ease. Like it's not as if you're being forceful about it and all of that. And I think that's one thing that is so stunning about this novel. So yeah, thank you so, so much. If I
Thank
say
you.
yeah. So yeah,
Live
it's a
and direct.
7.5 for me. Yes, yes, yes,
Thank
yes.
you. That's
And this is to me
very, very
stepping out of my
generous.
comfort zone more. Reading less rom-coms and realistic fiction. Yeah. I hope to explore more of this particular genre more. I'm definitely looking forward to see his new book and looking forward to all the subsequent, pieces, work from you. And how come we forgot to mention that Umar Turaki's essay was also featured in Of This Our Country? So we've actually reviewed that
All right.
particular book from the previous episode.
Oh yeah,
And
we did.
yeah,
All right.
that was how we found out about you, literally. And we're like, and then, so that's the,
Interesting.
should we let people in about it? But yeah, because of time, we'll just cut the story short. But the name first came to mind after we encountered you, so this is my country. And I thought that your
Of this
thoughts and
our
reflection
country.
about Nigeria as a country, of this our country, is like really, really compelling. So thank you so much for your time. And on that note, we will be saying our goodbyes till the next episode. I hope it's not going to be so long before we come back and come buzz up your headboards. And we just want to say a very big thank you to every single person who has listened in from start to finish. And you can always count on us for more books across the African continent that are definitely worth your while. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thank you, Umar, for joining. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great.